Hey, church family, thank you so much for joining us this morning for our daily devotional. So excited today on Memorial Day, and obviously I'm so excited to remember those who have served our country, but also I'm just really excited because yesterday I got to worship along many of you. I didn't get to see everyone. I was working in our overflow room, but I did get to see several of you guys and had to show a lot of restraint because I wanted to give you all hugs. I really did. But I know that right now that we can't necessarily do that. And so it would be so selfish of me, right? To just decide that I was going to run up and give you a hug, regardless of how you may feel about that or the potential consequences of that. And so as we kind of think about that, as I begin to think about that idea of selfishness, it really begins to kind of tie in with the scripture that we're going to look at today. And so Brother Brent kicked us off yesterday in Philippians and talked about our need to yield to Christ and yield to others in relationships. Not thinking about ourselves, but thinking about others' needs, just as Christ thought of our needs. And it ties so well with our passage today in James chapter 4, starting in verse 1. It says, "Was the source of wars and fights among you? Don't they come from your passions that wage war within you? You desire and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and wage war. You do not have because you do not ask." And so what's going on here is the church that James is writing to, these Christians, they're being persecuted by Jews. They're being persecuted by the Romans because of their faith. They're in this constant place of turmoil. And so you would think that in the midst of this constant turmoil, that they would unite together and use their relationship with Christ, use their shared persecution to strengthen one another. But what was actually happening is these people were just taking the anger and taking that war, and they were taking it into the relationships with one another. They were fighting over things that they wanted or didn't have that they wanted, and they were thinking of their own selfish desires and their own selfish passions, and not the desires and passions of the people around them. And so James is trying to tell them, hey, look, your selfishness is that's what's causing these fights. That's what's causing these wars. You want what you want, and you're not thinking about everybody else. I think that's something that at times we're all guilty of. Certainly, I'm guilty of that. Yesterday, wanting to give everyone a hug, and I knew I couldn't, and definitely war waging within me on that. But there are even more serious things that sometimes we're willing to hurt others to get. And you know what that is for you, just like I know what that is for me. And what we need to remember is we need to yield in those relationships. We need to yield to Christ, who would never he would never want us to put those desires in such a high place where they almost become a God in our life. And we also need to yield to others and their needs and their wants and their desires. We should constantly be looking at the desires and wants of the world around us and not just at our own. And as we do that, as we move away from selfishness and we become more selfless, then we're going to begin to look more like Christ. Our author gives us a couple of questions that we can look at. The first one, in what ways are you tempted to act selfishly? And then second of all, why are our prayers hindered when we live by selfish perspectives? So take a moment, look at those questions, really hone in on what we're talking about here, especially that second question, that whole idea of our prayers being hindered. And I think some of that is because our prayers are hindered because the desires are our desires and they're not God's desires. Our prayers, our desires should align with the will of God and not with our own will. So take a moment as a group or as a family, or even if you're by yourself, maybe journal and look at those questions and see how you can maybe apply some of what we talked about here today. Church family, more than anything, we want you to know that we love you and we're praying for you.